In other business news, analysts have sought to highlight that South Africa's trade relations with the Democratic Republic of Congo may be under threat amid conflict that has resulted in the deaths of 9 SANDF soldiers in battle with the M23 rebels. A history of strained relations exists between the two countries, despite several export and import agreements in place in sectors ranging from mining to farming. A debate is now brewing over South Africa's position to continue playing a constructive role in promoting peace and stability in Eastern DRC or recall its troops. The Political Economy Southern Africa Executive Director Sia Piniza speaks to us about this. Thank you so much for your time, Sia. What really is at stake here when we talk about South Africa-DRC trade relations amid this conflict?
Sure. So I think really the impact of this conflict on the trade relations is really going to kill what is already kind of precarious trade relations. Historically, trade relations between the DRC and South Africa were around $3.5 billion. That's dwindled down to as little as $1.5 billion in 2023, which is the last set of data that's available currently. And one of the biggest drivers for this decline has been what the DRC imports from South Africa. South African exports or the DRC's imports from South Africa have really declined from about 16% of their total imports from the world in 2019 to 3% in 2023. However, what's also declined but remained relatively in the same range has been what South Africa exports to the DRC. What we import is actually what's declined from about 2.2 billion in 2019 to just over 400 million. But what we continue to export has also reduced slightly from 1.2 to 1.1 billion in the same period. And this is really what's at stake and is probably set to continue declining as this conflict worsens.
Sia, I think this begs the question then what a withdrawal of South African troops would mean for the economy of the DRC then.
So this is going to have a significant impact, particularly on the DRC's exports to South Africa. As mentioned, these have declined from 2 billion to around 400 million over the years. And this was largely driven by the inorganic chemical exports from the DRC, as well as copper, which combined constitute over 90% of the total exports that the DRC takes to South Africa. Now, this has a significant impact, negative impact for the DRC because they will earn less dollars as these exports decline. However, they will then need to find alternative markets with which to take their exports. But this is also as the exports from the regions that are affected by the conflict also decline. And so really, overall, the economy of the DRC is set to have a severe setback as a result of this conflict as it worsens. However, when you look at South Africa's exports to the DRC, these, as I mentioned, have remained rather stable from about 1.2 billion in 2019 to 1.1 billion in 2023. And they're quite diversified, but some of the top exports that we provide are petroleum, pumps, machinery, and plant equipment. Obviously, as this conflict worsens and the confidence in the SADC mission also wanes, what this does is it's going to have an impact on investor or even confidence in other deals which are currently being negotiated and finalized between South Africa and the DRC. One in particular is the next phase of the Inga Dam investment, to which South Africa, or at least Eskom, is a huge off-taker, which is providing some of the bankability, enabling investors to then invest in the further enhancement of the hydroelectric power generation on the Congo River.
Interesting that you raised the latter there because there are obviously going to be bottlenecks, impediments to further relations between the two countries. And I'm even more interested in how this then poses a potential economic implication for South African businesses that are already operating in the Eastern DRC.
Yes, I think it's really going to be a negative impact. As mentioned, even prior to the worsening of the conflict, the exports have really been cut almost by half. And as M23 expands its influence and takes over larger areas of northern Kivu, and who knows when that expansion is expected to end. This will obviously have a negative impact on firms that are operating in the DRC. Historically, though, the conflict has been largely contained within the eastern parts of the DRC. But what you're seeing now with this aggressive expansion is it's likely to spread to other areas. The Katanga and the Haut Katanga regions, which are mineral rich, have historically been not so severely affected by the conflict. But if the continued expansion of M23's influence in the region remains unchecked, this could actually put severe pressure on other areas, and it is likely to affect other areas that were historically unaffected by the conflict. Now, the DRC government is trying by all means to continue its planned infrastructure investment across the country, which is, I think, part of the obstacle which doesn't enable conventional military efforts to actually deter the M23. Some of the regions in North Kivu are not accessible by road, and once they've taken over the Goma airport, that also means that our troops in the region will struggle in terms of receiving equipment or replenishments, but also the evacuation of these troops now is something that's at jeopardy. And so what you expect then, if the conflict and the expansion of M23 remains unchecked, is that that's now going to affect the confidence in other investments in the infrastructure expansion that the government of the DRC is aiming to do. They're aiming to expand the national road network in order to enable more conventional access to these areas. But if this conflict and the expansion of M23's influence remains unchecked, those plans now remain at jeopardy as well.
Escalating concerns indeed. It's one to keep a close eye on. Thank you so much for your time. Executive Director at PESA, that's Siya Piniza, talking to us about developments around the trade relations between South Africa and the DRC.